The door behind her had closed forever. The cattle car lurched to a violent stop, throwing Maeve Brennan against the wooden slats. Her fingers, already numb from the Montana cold, lost their grip on the wall. The conductor's boot caught her square in the ribs, sending her tumbling into the frozen mud beside the tracks. "No freeloaders," he spat, his breath forming angry clouds in the morning air. "Should have thought twice before stealing a ride, girl." Maeve didn't argue. There was no point. She'd learned long ago that explaining only made men angrier. She pulled herself up, mud caking her only dress, and watched the train chug away. Black smoke disappearing into the gray sky. Her ribs ached where he'd kicked her, but she'd had worse, much worse. The wind cut through her thin wool shawl like a blade. February in Montana was no friend to anyone, least of all a woman with nothing but the clothes on her back and 3 coins sewn into her corset. 3 coins that had to last until what she didn't know. All she knew was that she could never go back to Kansas, to the farm where her father had sold her future to pay his gambling debts. Red Rock appeared through the morning mist like a wound on the landscape. Low buildings huddled together against the cold, smoke rising from chimneys into the pale sky. The muddy main street was already busy despite the early hour. Men loading wagons, horses stamping their feet against the cold, shop owners sweeping wooden sidewalks. Maeve straightened her spine and began walking. Each step sent pain shooting through her side, but she kept her head up. She'd learned that lesson to never look weak, never look lost. Wolves could smell fear, and there were more 2-legged wolves in these frontier towns than 4-legged ones. The first person she passed, a woman in a decent blue dress, took one look at Maeve's mud-stained appearance and crossed to the other side of the street. A group of men outside the hardware store stopped their conversation to stare. One of them whistled low and ugly. Well, looks like the morning train brought us a present." Maeve kept walking. "Don't engage, don't respond, just move." The smell of fresh bread nearly brought her to her knees. When had she last eaten? 3 days ago, 4. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she forced herself past the bakery window. Those 3 coins had to last. Had to. She tried the general store first. The proprietor, a thin man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down like she was livestock at auction. "I can work," Maeve said simply. "I can read, write, do figures, stock shelves, sweep, whatever you need." "Can you now?" His smile made her skin crawl. "And what else can you do, Miss Brennan, Maeve Brennan? And I can work, that's all." "That's all?" He leaned across the counter. "Pretty thing like you, traveling alone, covered in mud. I'm thinking you can do more than stock shelves." Maeve turned and left without another word. The story would be the same at the dress shop, the telegraph office, even the church. A woman alone was only one thing in towns like this, no matter what she said, no matter how hard she was willing to work. By noon, her feet were numb in her thin boots. She'd been to every respectable establishment in Red Rock. The answers were all variations of the same theme. "We don't need that kind of help. This is a decent establishment. Try the saloon, girl. That's where your type belongs." Her type, as if they knew anything about her. As if they knew she'd spent 6 years keeping her father's books, running the farm accounts while he drank away their profits. As if they knew she could birth a calf, break a horse, and calculate interest in her head faster than most men could on paper. But none of that mattered. Not when you were 23, alone, and female in a world that saw those 3 things as invitations to destruction. The sun, what little showed through the clouds, was beginning its descent toward the mountains. The cold was deepening, settling into her bones like an unwelcome guest planning to stay. She'd seen what happened to people who tried to sleep outside in Montana winters. Come morning, they were blue and stiff as boards. There was only one place left she hadn't tried. The Broken Wheel Inn squatted at the far end of town like a toad, all weathered wood and dirty windows, even from outside. She could hear the rough laughter, smell the whiskey and unwashed bodies. Her mother would have died of shame to see her daughter even considering such a place. But her mother was already dead, and shame was a luxury Maeve could no longer afford. The warmth hit her like a physical blow when she pushed through the door. For a moment, she just stood there, letting feeling return to her fingers and toes. The main room was thick with smoke, crowded with men hunched over cards and whiskey. A few looked up at her entrance. Most just kept drinking. The proprietor was a massive man with greasy hair and small, mean eyes. Cal Hensley. She'd heard his name whispered in town, usually followed by warning. He looked up from wiping a glass that would never be clean and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Well now, what have we here?" Maeve forced herself to approach the bar. "I need a room for the night. I can pay." "Can you now?" Cal's eyes traveled over her slowly, cataloging every tear in her dress, every smudge of mud. "Room's $2. You got $2. Girl." She didn't. They both knew she didn't. I have 50 cents, but I can work, I can clean, cook." 50 cents. Cal laughed, and several men at nearby tables joined in. 50 cents doesn't buy you a corner of the floor, sweetheart. "Please." The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "Just for tonight. It's freezing outside. I'll work tomorrow to pay the rest." Cal leaned forward, his breath sour with tobacco and rot-gut whiskey. "Oh, you'll work all right. Question is, what kind of work are you willing to do?" The room had gone quieter. Maeve could feel eyes on her from every corner, waiting to see what she'd say, what she'd do. Some watched with anticipation, others with something that might have been pity, if pity could survive in a place like this. "I told you, I can clean, I got someone who cleans." Cal's voice dropped lower. "But there's other work, upstairs work, pretty thing like you could make good money. Enough for a room, enough for meals, enough to get you wherever you're trying to go." The words hung in the smoky air between them. Maeve's hands clenched in her muddy skirts. This was it. Then, this was the moment she'd been running from since leaving Kansas. The moment where she had to decide what survival was worth. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Death before dishonor. Maeve, a woman's virtue is all she has." But her mother had never been alone in Montana in February with 50 cents to her name. Her mother had never felt her ribs crack under a man's boot or watched everything she'd known burn to ash. Maeve's voice caught. The room spun slightly, hunger and exhaustion finally catching up. "I need to think. Think fast, sweetheart. Offer expires when that sun goes down. After that..." Cal shrugged. "After that, the price goes up. Supply and demand. You understand?" A hand grabbed her arm, thick fingers digging into flesh. One of the men from the nearest table had stood up, whiskey heavy on his breath. "Why wait? I got $5 right here, says she'll..." "The lady's with me." The voice came from the doorway, deep and steady as mountain stone. Every head in the room turned. The man standing there was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long leather coat that had seen better decades. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his face was all angles and shadows in the lamplight. But it was his eyes that made the room step back, gray as winter storms and twice as cold. The drunk holding Maeve's arm snorted. "Says who?" The stranger stepped into the room, spurs ringing against the floorboards. He moved like a man who'd never met a fight he couldn't finish. "Says me, Thorne Ashford. Now take your hand off her before I remove it. Your choice whether it stays attached." Something in his voice must have penetrated even whiskey-soaked bravado. The drunk released Maeve's arm and stumbled back to his table, muttering curses but not meeting Thorne's eyes. Cal straightened behind the bar. "Ashford, didn't know you were back in town." "Just rode in." Thorne moved to the bar, positioning himself between Maeve and the rest of the room. She could smell leather and horse and something else. Pine smoke and winter wind. "The lady needs a room." "Like I told her, Rooms are $2. She's 50 cents short of 3 silver dollars rang on the bar top. There's 3, 1 for tonight, 1 for tomorrow, 1 for you to forget this conversation happened. Cal's piggy eyes narrowed. You claiming her? I'm paying for a room. Thorne's voice carried warning like a blade carries edge. Nothing more, nothing less. We clear. For a moment, the bar balanced on a knife's edge. Then Cal swept up the coins and pulled a key from beneath the bar. Room 4, upstairs, end of the hall. Thorne took the key and turned to Maeve. This close. She could see lines carved by sun and wind around his eyes, a thin scar along his jaw. He held out the key. Room's yours. No strings. No payment expected. Maeve stared at the key, then at him. Why? Because it's February in Montana and you're about to fall over. His voice softened slightly. Take the room. Lock the door. Get warm. Whatever else you decide it tomorrow when you're not half frozen and starved. She took the key with trembling fingers. Their hands brushed for a moment, his warm, hers ice cold. Thank you, she whispered. He touched the brim of his hat and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, looking back. Lock the door, he repeated. Cal has keys to all the rooms, but a chair wedged under the handle works well enough. There's one in the room. Then he was gone, leaving Maeve holding a key and a chance she hadn't dared hope for. The bar erupted in conversation the moment the door closed behind him, but she didn't stay to listen. She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, found room 4, and locked herself inside. The room was small, bare, but it had a bed with actual blankets and a small stove with wood already laid. She lit the fire with fumbling fingers, then wedged the chair under the door handle exactly as Thorne had suggested. Only then, in the safety of 4 walls and a locked door, did Maeve Brennan allow herself to cry, not from sadness or self-pity, but from relief. She'd made it through another day without selling the only thing the world seemed to think she had of value. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, but tonight she was warm. Tonight she was safe. Tonight, a stranger had looked at her and seen something worth protecting, not purchasing. It wasn't much, but in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty, it was everything. Outside her window, snow began to fall, covering Red Rock in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Somewhere out there, Thorne Ashford rode through the storm, having asked for nothing but that she survive the night. Maeve pulled the thin blankets around her shoulders and watched the snow fall. Tomorrow, she'd find a way to repay his kindness. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to build a life that didn't depend on the mercy of strangers. But tonight, she would simply be grateful that mercy still existed in the world, even in a place as hard as Montana territory, even for a woman with a closed door behind her and an uncertain path ahead. The morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality Maeve had briefly escaped. She'd slept fitfully, jerking awake at every creak of the old building, every drunken shout from below. But she'd slept warm, and that was more than she'd dared hope for yesterday. The small mirror above the wash basin showed her the truth. Mud still caked in her dark hair, her dress beyond salvation, her face gaunt from days without proper food. She did what she could with the pitcher of cold water, scrubbing her face and hands until they were raw but clean. The noise from downstairs had quieted. Most of the patrons would have stumbled home or passed out in corners. This was her chance to slip out, to figure out her next move before Cal Hensley remembered she existed. But when she removed the chair and cracked open the door, her heart sank. Cal stood at the top of the stairs, as if he'd been waiting. His smile was the same oily thing from last night. "Morning, Miss Brennan. Sleep well." "Well enough." She kept her voice steady, her hand on the door handle. "Good, good." He moved closer, blocking her path to the stairs. "Now, about that room. Your friend paid for 2 nights. But he's gone. Rode out before dawn. That leaves you and me to discuss your future accommodations.
I told you yesterday, I can work.
And I told you what kind of work I'm interested in. His voice hardened. That offer from last night, price has gone up. See, I did some asking around. You're the girl who tried to get work at every shop in town yesterday. No family, no references, no prospects. Means you got no options except what I'm offering. Maeve's mind raced. The window at the end of the hall was too small, too high. The stairs were blocked. She could scream. But who would come? Who would care?
I need a few days, she said, to think about it, to...
Thinking time costs money too. Cal stepped closer. She could smell his unwashed body, see the calculation in his small eyes. But maybe we could work out a payment plan, starting right now. His hand reached for her arm. Maeve jerked back, but there was nowhere to go. The wall was at her back, Cal in front of her, and...
There a problem here?
The voice was calm, conversational even, but it froze Cal mid-reach. Thorne Ashford stood at the top of the stairs, one hand resting casual-like on his gun belt. He looked different in the morning light, his coat dusty from the trail, stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes were the same winter gray, and they were fixed on Cal with an intensity that made the bigger man step back. "Thought you left town," Cal said, trying to recover his bluster. "Changed my mind." Thorne moved down the hall with that same easy stride, positioning himself between Cal and Maeve. "Decided to stay another day, maybe two."
"This ain't your business. Ashford, the girl and I were just discussing."
The lady was just leaving. Thorne didn't turn to look at her, keeping his eyes on Cal. "Weren't you Miss Brennan?"
Yes."
Maeve found her voice.
"Yes, I was."
"See, no discussion needed." Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, I believe you have a bar to tend to. Cal wouldn't want folks thinking the broken wheel doesn't open on time." Cal's face flushed red, then purple. For a moment, Maeve thought he might actually challenge Thorne. Then his eyes flicked to the gun at Thorne's hip, and whatever he saw in the other man's face made him think better of it. "This ain't over," he muttered, pushing past them toward the stairs. "Girl owes me for the inconvenience. One way or another. She'll pay." They stood in silence until Cal's heavy footsteps faded below. Only then did Thorne turn to her. "You hurt."
"No."
Maeve's voice came out shakier than she intended.
"No, thank you, again."
"You eat anything since yesterday?" The question surprised her. She shook her head. "Come on, then." He started toward the stairs. When she didn't immediately follow, he glanced back. "Unless you'd rather stay here and continue your conversation with Cal." That got her moving. She followed him down the stairs, through the mercifully empty bar, and out into the crisp morning air. The sun was just cresting the mountains, painting the snow-covered streets in shades of gold and pink. "Where are we going?" she asked as he led her away from the main street. "Getting you some breakfast. Then we're going to have a talk about your situation. I can't pay you back. For the room,
I don't recall asking you to."
His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "I also don't buy people. Miss Brennan. Not for $3, not for $300. What I do is offer folks a fair shake when they need one. That's all." They walked in silence to a small establishment on the edge of town, cleaner than the broken wheel, with checkered curtains in the windows and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting out. The woman behind the counter, broad-faced and gray-haired, looked up as they entered. "Thorne Ashford, as I live and breathe. Heard you were back. Morning, Mrs. Muller." He touched his hat brim. "2 breakfasts, if you please, and make hers a double portion." "Mrs." Muller's sharp eyes took in Maeve's appearance, but she said nothing beyond, "Coming right up. Coffee's hot." They sat at a corner table, away from the windows. Maeve wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth seep into her bones. She wanted to ask a dozen questions. Who was this man? Why was he helping her? What would he want in return? But she'd learned to stay quiet and observe. "Cal's not going to let this go," Thorne said after a moment. "Man like him doesn't like being crossed, especially not in front of others. You planning on staying in Red Rock?" "I don't have anywhere else to go." The admission cost her. But there was no point in lies. Family. Dead. Friends. None that would take me in. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected as much. Misses. Muller appeared with plates loaded with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes. Maeve's stomach clenched painfully at the sight. "Eat slow," Thorne advised. "Been hungry too long. You'll make yourself sick if you rush." She forced herself to take small bites, though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight. Thorne ate steadily, his eyes occasionally scanning the door and windows. "You know Cal well?" she asked between bites. "Well enough. He runs girls out of the broken wheel, takes a cut of everything they earn. Some come willing, thinking it's easy money. Others," he shrugged, "others don't have a choice, or think they don't. And you just happened to be there last night." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I make it a point to stop by when I'm in town. Cal knows it. Most of the regulars know it. Keeps them polite." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You ever see what happens to a town when men forget how to be civilized? When they start thinking everything's for sale, everyone's for the taking, it rots from the inside out. I've seen it happen. Don't care to see it happen here." "So you're what? The town conscience?" "Hardly." His laugh was short and bitter. "I'm just a man who's seen enough ugliness to know it needs pushing back now and then." They finished eating in relative silence. Maeve managed most of her plate before her shrunken stomach protested. She sat back, fuller than she'd been in a week, and faced the reality of her situation. "I need work," she said. "Real work. I won't do what Cal wants, but I can't keep depending on the charity of strangers either." "What can you do?" "Keep books, write letters, do sums. I can sew, cook, clean. I know horses, cattle, farm work." She lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of hard labor." "The problem isn't what you can do," Thorne said. "It's what folks will let you do. You saw that yesterday. A woman alone, no references, no family to vouch for her. Most places won't take the risk." "Then what am I supposed to do?" The desperation she'd been holding back crept into her voice. "I can't go back where I came from. I won't go upstairs at the broken wheel. What's left?" Thorne pushed back from the table. "Come with me. Want to show you something?" He left money on the table, more than enough for both meals, and led her out. This time they headed south, away from the main part of town. The buildings grew sparser, giving way to a collection of tents and rough cabins scattered among the pine trees. "What is this place?" Maeve asked. "Trappers' camp. Hunters, scouts, folks who bring in pelts and game to sell. I work out of here sometimes, when I'm not riding patrol for the mining companies." He gestured to a larger tent set apart from the others. "That's Cookie's kitchen. He feeds the camp, does the buying when suppliers come through." An older man emerged from the tent, native features marked by years of sun and wind. He looked at Thorne, then at Maeve, and something passed between the men that she couldn't read. "Cookie, this is Miss Brennan. Miss Brennan. Cookie runs this camp better than any army sergeant." Cookie nodded. "Miss, she needs work," Thorne continued. "Honest work. Can keep books, knows her letters and numbers, could help with the buying, tracking what comes in and out. Camp's getting bigger. Might be useful to have someone who can do more than make marks on a stick." Cookie studied her for a long moment. "You run from trouble or toward it?" "From," Maeve answered honestly. "But trouble seems to follow anyway." "Don't it always?" Cookie's weathered face cracked into what might have been a smile. "Can you start today?" Maeve looked between the two men.
Yes, I can start today. Good. Pays $1 a day plus meals. You sleep in town or find your own arrangements? We don't ask about your past. You don't bring your troubles to camp. Fair? More than fair. Cookie disappeared back into the tent. Thorne started to walk away, then paused. This doesn't solve your problem with Cal, he said, but it gives you options. $1 a day isn't much, but it's honest money. Enough to rent a room at Mrs. Muller's boarding house, if she has one free. Enough to save for a train ticket, if you decide to move on. Why? Maeve asked again. Why are you doing this? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was seeing something beyond the pine trees and morning sky. Because someone should have, he said simply. Then he touched his hat and walked away, leaving her standing at the edge of a new possibility. The sun climbed higher, warming the air and melting the snow from the branches. Inside the tent, Cookie was already calling for her to help with inventory. There would be numbers to track, supplies to count, a ledger to keep. Simple work, honest work. For the first time in months, Maeve Brennan felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The cold was bone deep by the time Maeve finished her first day at the camp. Her fingers ached from gripping the pencil, making careful entries in Cookie's ledger. But it was good pain. The pain of honest work. The sun had already dipped behind the mountains when Cookie finally released her. Same time tomorrow, he said, handing her a wrapped bundle. Leftover biscuits and dried meat. Don't look like you've been eating regular. She tucked the food inside her shawl, murmuring thanks. The walk back to town seemed longer in the growing darkness. Other workers from the camp walked the same path, rough men who smelled of trap oil and blood. But they kept their distance, offering nothing more than brief nods. Thorne's name carried weight here. She realized. Word had already spread that she was under his protection. But Thorne himself had vanished after the morning introduction. She'd caught glimpses of his horse throughout the day, heard his voice carrying across the camp, but he'd kept away. It should have relieved her. Instead, it left her feeling strangely exposed. The broken wheel squatted in the darkness ahead, windows glowing like malevolent eyes. Her steps slowed. The room was paid for another night, but walking back in there, facing Cal again. You're late. She jumped, heart hammering. Thorne materialized from the shadows beside the building, his breath misting in the cold air. I was working, she said, trying to steady her voice. I know. He studied her in the dim light spilling from the saloon windows. Cal's inside, 3 sheets to the wind and telling anyone who'll listen how he's going to collect what you owe him. Her stomach tightened. I don't owe him anything. You and I know that. Cal's got a different kind of accounting. He shifted, leather coat creaking. Mrs. Muller has a room. Clean, quiet, door that locks proper. $15 a month, includes breakfast. I don't have $15. You will in 2 weeks. He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch. Call this an advance on your wages. Cookie agreed to it. Maeve stared at the pouch, pride warring with practicality. I can't keep taking... It's not charity. His voice was flat, brooking no argument. It's common sense. You go back in there tonight. Cal's drunk enough to try something stupid. Then I'd have to hurt him, which would cause all kinds of complications I don't need. This is simpler. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself. But the memory of Cal's hands reaching for her that morning killed the words. She took the pouch. I'll pay it back, every penny. I know you will. He started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Come on, Mrs. Muller closes her doors at 8 sharp. They walked in silence through the quiet streets. Most of Red Rock's decent folk were already inside, leaving the night to those with darker business. Somewhere a piano played badly, and drunken laughter spilled from more than one doorway. How long have you been doing this? Maeve asked suddenly. Doing what? riding into towns, saving women from men like Cal. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. I don't save anyone, he finally said. Just even the odds a bit. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting.
Mrs. Muller's boarding house sat on a respectable street. 2 stories of neat white clapboard with a front porch that actually had flowers struggling through the snow. The woman herself answered Thorne's knock, taking in Maeve's appearance with those sharp eyes.
So you're the one got Cal all riled up, she said. Heard about this morning. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Maeve began. Trouble was already there. Girl, you just brought it to light. She stepped back. Come in before you freeze. Thorne, you staying for coffee?
No, ma'am. Just seeing Miss Brennan settled.
Mrs.
Muller led them to a small room at the back of the house. It was simple. Bed, washstand, small table, and chair. But it was clean, with a rag rug on the floor and curtains at the window. Most importantly, it had a solid door with a good lock. Breakfast is at 6. Dinner at 6:30 if you're here for it. No gentlemen callers after 8, no liquor on the premises, no loud behavior. Break my rules. You're out. Clear. Yes, ma'am. Very clear. Mrs. Muller's stern expression softened slightly.
There's a bathtub down the hall. Hot water on Saturdays, but I could heat some tonight if you're wanting.
Maeve felt her eyes burn with sudden tears.
A bath, a real bath, in hot water. Thank you, that would be, thank you. I'll put the kettle on.
Mrs. Muller bustled out, leaving Maeve alone with Thorne. He stood by the door, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable in the feminine space. You'll be safe here. Mrs. Muller doesn't tolerate nonsense.
And she's got a shotgun she knows how to use.
Why do you care? The question burst out before she could stop it.
You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. Why does it matter if I'm safe?
He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed at odds with his usual stillness.
You ever see a wolf caught in a trap?
The question surprised her. Once, back in Kansas.
What did you do?
My father shot it. The memory was sharp. The wolf's yellow eyes. The way it had stopped struggling when it saw them coming. Like it knew. Said it was kindness. Maybe it was. He put his hat on, adjusting the brim. But maybe the real kindness would have been springing the trap, giving it a chance to run, even if it was hurt, even if it didn't make it far.
I'm not a wolf.
No, he agreed. You're not. Wolves are simpler. They just want to survive. People want to survive with their dignity intact. That's harder. He moved to the door, then paused. Lock this behind me. Cal's drunk, but he's not stupid. He won't come here causing trouble. But it's good habits that keep you breathing out here. Then he was gone, boot heels echoing down the hallway. Maeve turned the lock, listening to the solid click. For the second night in a row. She had walls around her and a door between her and the world. This time, she'd earned it with her own labor, even if Thorne had advanced the money. Mrs. Muller knocked a few minutes later, bringing towels and a clean nightgown.
It's my daughter's,
she explained.
She's married now, living in Denver, left some things behind.
The bathtub was in a small room at the end of the hall, and the hot water was heaven itself. Maeve soaked until her skin pruned, scrubbing away days of dirt and fear. The nightgown was soft cotton, patched but clean, and smelled of lavender sachets. When she returned to her room, she found a tray on the table, soup, bread, and a cup of tea. A note in Mrs. Muller's careful script read, Thorne said you might be hungry, no charge. Maeve ate slowly, savoring each bite. Through her window, she could see the lights of Red Rock spread below, the broken wheel a distant glow. Somewhere in that light, Cal Hensley was drinking and planning. Somewhere, Thorne Ashford was doing whatever men like him did with their evenings. She pulled out Cookie's ledger, reviewing the day's entries by candlelight. Tomorrow there would be more supplies to count, more numbers to track. It wasn't much of a life yet, but it was a start, a clean start. Her mother would have been appalled, her daughter working in a camp full of rough men, taking advances from a stranger, living in a boarding house like some common laborer. But her mother had died believing a woman's place was secure, that marriage and family would always provide. She died before learning that security was an illusion, that a man's debts could be paid with his daughter's future. Maeve blew out the candle and lay in the narrow bed, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere a clock chimed 9. In the morning, she'd rise early, eat Mrs. Muller's breakfast, and walk to the camp. She'd work hard, save her money, pay back what she owed. And maybe, eventually, she'd stop looking over her shoulder, stop waiting for the trap to spring shut, stop wondering when Thorne Ashford would present his bill for services rendered. Because men like him always had a price. She'd learned that lesson well. The only question was what currency he'd demand, and whether she'd have enough to pay it. But that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, she was clean and fed and safe. Tonight, that was enough. She fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of running. The routine settled around Maeve like a worn blanket. Comfortable, familiar, safe. Each morning she walked the frozen path to camp. Each evening she returned to Mrs. Muller's boarding house with tired feet and ink-stained fingers. A week passed, then 2. The men at camp grew used to her presence, nodding their greetings, some even removing their hats when she passed. But it was the 3rd week that changed things. Thorne had been gone for 4 days, riding patrol for one of the mining companies up north. Without his presence, the camp felt different, looser, less ordered. Cookie kept things running, but there was an edge to the men's laughter, a boldness in their glances that hadn't been there before. Maeve was bent over the ledger in Cookie's tent when she heard the commotion outside. Horses, several of them, riding hard into camp. She looked up to find Cookie already reaching for the rifle he kept beside the coffee pot. "Stay inside," he said quietly. Through the tent flap, she could see riders dismounting, 5 men, trail-dusty and grim-faced, but it was the 6th rider that made her blood freeze. Thorne, slumped forward in his saddle, his left arm strapped to his chest, dark stains spreading across his leather coat. Cookie was out of the tent before she could move, catching Thorne as he half fell from his horse. "Easy there, easy. What happened?" "Ambush." Thorne's voice was rough with pain. "North Pass. Got most of them. But—" He swayed, and it took 2 men to keep him upright. "Get him to my tent," Cookie ordered. "Maeve, bring my medical kit, the red bag hanging by the stove." She grabbed the bag and followed, heart hammering. They'd laid Thorne on Cookie's narrow cot, and in the lamplight, she could see the damage clearly. Bullet wound in his left shoulder, knife slash across his ribs, various cuts and bruises that spoke of a hard fight. "Need to get this coat off," Cookie muttered. "Maeve, hold his shoulders steady." She moved without thinking, bracing Thorne as Cookie cut away the coat and shirt. The bullet wound was ugly, but clean, through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone and major vessels. Lucky, if you could call any bullet wound lucky. "Whiskey," Thorne gritted out. "For the wound or for you?" "Both." Cookie poured amber liquid over the wound, and Thorne's whole body went rigid. Maeve found herself gripping his good hand, and he squeezed back hard enough to grind bones. "Bullet's through," Cookie announced. "Just needs cleaning and stitching. You've had worse." "Doesn't mean I enjoyed it," Thorne muttered. His eyes found Maeve's. "You shouldn't be seeing this." "I've birthed calves and butchered hogs," she said. "This isn't my first blood, Mr. Ashford." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Cookie threaded a needle, and Maeve watched him work with steady hands. The knife wound was shallower, More bleeding than damage. Within an hour, Thorne was stitched, bandaged, and propped up with pillows, sipping from a cup of what smelled like the worst coffee ever brewed. "What happened?" Cookie asked once the immediate doctoring was done. "Claim jumpers. Hit the mining company's payroll wagon. We tracked them to the North Pass, thought we had them cornered." Thorne winced as he shifted. "They had friends waiting. Lost 2 men, but we got the payroll back. And nearly got yourself killed doing it. Part of the job." Cookie snorted. "Stupid part." He stood, wiping bloody hands on a rag. "You need rest. Few days at least before you're riding anywhere." "Can't stay here. Camp's no place for—" "I'll take him." Both men turned to stare at Maeve. She lifted her chin, meeting their surprised looks steadily. "Mrs. Muller has an empty room on the ground floor. She's nursed plenty of injured men. Her late husband was a doctor. Between the 2 of us, we can manage." "That's not proper," Cookie said slowly. "Young woman like you, tending a man." "Proper went out the window when I started working in a camp full of trappers," Maeve interrupted. "Mr. Ashford saved me from a bad situation. Least I can do is return the favor." Thorne was shaking his head. "I don't need nursing. I'll be fine at my cabin." "Your cabin's an hour's ride into the woods," Cookie pointed out. "You can barely sit up, much less ride. And who's going to change those bandages, your horse?" The argument went back and forth, but in the end, practicality won. 2 of the trappers helped load Thorne into a wagon, and Maeve walked alongside as they made the slow journey to town. Mrs. Muller took one look at the situation and started giving orders like a general preparing for battle. "Ground floor room. Like I thought, used to be my husband's study when he saw patients. Still has the medical supplies in the cabinet." She fixed Thorne with a stern look as the men helped him inside. "You'll behave yourself, Mr. Ashford, or I'll finish what those claim jumpers started." It took some maneuvering to get him settled, but finally Thorne was installed in the small room, looking pale and irritated in equal measure. "This is unnecessary," he said once they were alone. "I've tended my own wounds before." "I'm sure you have." Maeve busied herself checking the medical supplies. "But Cookie says those stitches need checking twice a day, and the bandages need changing. Unless you've grown a 3rd arm recently, you'll need help." He was quiet for a moment, watching her sort through bottles and rolled bandages. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why offer to do this? You don't owe me anything." She turned to face him. "Don't I? You kept me from Cal's hands. You got me work, advanced me money for this room. You think I've forgotten?" "I told you, I don't buy people. Those weren't debts to be repaid." "Maybe not to you." She moved to check his bandages. "All business. But I pay what I owe. Mr. Ashford, one way or another." He caught her wrist as she reached for his shoulder, his grip gentle but firm. "Not like this. Not because you think you owe me. If you're here, be here because you choose it. Nothing else." For a moment, they stayed frozen like that, his fingers warm around her wrist, his eyes serious in the lamplight. Then she carefully extracted her hand. "I choose to help a wounded man who helped me," she said simply. "That's all." The tension eased. She checked his bandages, no fresh bleeding, everything holding, and helped him drink some of the willow bark tea misses Muller had prepared. "Tastes like boiled tree," he complained. "That's because it is boiled tree. Drink it anyway." Days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings she worked at the camp, keeping Cookie's books. Afternoons and evenings she tended Thorne, changing bandages, bringing meals, keeping him company when the pain and boredom made him restless. He was a difficult patient at first, trying to do too much too soon. The second day, she caught him trying to saddle his horse with one arm. "Are you completely without sense?" she demanded, leading him back inside. "I have responsibilities." "You have 2 holes in your body that are trying to heal.
The mining company can survive without you for a week. You don't understand. If I don't ride patrol, I don't get paid. If I don't get paid. Cookie already talked to them. Your job's safe. Now sit down before you tear those stitches and I have to sew you up myself. Gradually, he settled into the forced rest. She discovered he could read and write, unusual for a man in his profession, and brought books from Mrs. Miller's small library. He told her about the territories he'd traveled, the towns he'd seen born and die, the way the frontier was changing. "Won't be long before the railroad comes through here," he said one evening as she changed his shoulder bandage. "Changes everything when it does. Towns get civilized real quick when Eastern money starts flowing." "Is that good or bad?" "Both, neither." He winced as she cleaned around the wound. "Depends on what side of civilization you're standing on." "Which side are you on?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Haven't decided yet." By the 5th day, he was moving better, the color back in his face. The shoulder was healing clean, the knife wound already closing nicely. Another few days and he'd be back to his normal life, riding the dangerous paths between towns, keeping order in his own quiet way. The thought shouldn't have bothered her. She had her own life now, work, wages, a safe place to sleep. She didn't need him anymore. But that evening, as she prepared to leave after the final bandage check, he caught her hand again. "Maeve." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "What you've done this week, I won't forget it." "It's nothing you wouldn't have done." "Maybe, but you chose to do it. That matters." She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused from rope and rain, hers stained with ink and lately, his blood. "We're even now." "We were never uneven." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle as a whisper. "That's what you don't understand. I didn't help you to create a debt. I helped you because it was right. People don't do things just because they're right. Some do." He released her hand, but the warmth lingered. "You do. You could have walked past when I came in shot up, could have let Cookie and the others handle it, but you offered to help because you thought it was right. Or because I owed you." "No." His voice was certain. "You'd have done it anyway. That's who you are. Maeve Brennan, someone who does the right thing, even when it costs you." She didn't know what to say to that, so she busied herself gathering the medical supplies. At the door, she paused. "Get some rest. Cookie wants you back at camp by week's end, and you know how he gets when people don't follow his schedules." "Maeve." She turned back. He was watching her with those storm-gray eyes, something unreadable in his expression. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they carried weight. She nodded once and slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. Tomorrow he'd be stronger. Soon he'd be gone, back to his dangerous life, and she'd return to her ledgers and her small room, building her quiet, safe existence one day at a time. But tonight, walking through the cold streets of Red Rock, she carried the memory of his hand on hers and wondered why safety suddenly felt so much like loneliness. Spring came late to Montana, creeping down from the mountains like a cautious visitor. The snow melted into mud, making the paths treacherous, but also bringing the first green shoots of new grass. Maeve had been at the camp for nearly 2 months now, and the rhythm of her days had become as natural as breathing. "You're getting soft," Cookie remarked one morning, watching her carefully sort through a shipment of supplies. "Time was, you jumped every time a man cleared his throat." "Maybe I'm just getting tired of jumping," she replied, marking down 3 bags of flour, 2 of salt. "Or maybe you're getting comfortable." He paused in his work. "That can be dangerous for a woman in your position." She knew what he meant. Comfort led to carelessness, and carelessness led to trouble. But it was hard to stay sharp when the days passed peacefully, when the men treated her with gruff respect, when even her nightmares had begun to fade. Thorne had returned to his patrols 3 weeks ago, his shoulder still stiff but functional. She saw him occasionally, a tall figure riding through camp, stopping to talk with Cookie.
sometimes glancing her way but never approaching. The easy conversation of his convalescence had disappeared, replaced by a careful distance that left her oddly bereft. Miss Brennan. She looked up to see young Tommy Hendricks running toward the tent. One of the newest additions to the camp, barely 18, still more boy than man, with an enthusiasm that hadn't yet been worn down by frontier life. "What is it, Tommy? There's folks in town looking for you, asking questions." Her blood chilled. The pencil slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. "What kind of folks?" "Two men, well-dressed, from back east by their look. They're at the Broken Wheel, buying drinks and asking about a woman named Maeve Brennan." Cookie was already reaching for his rifle. "How long ago?" "Maybe an hour. I came straight here when I heard—" Maeve's mind raced. It could be anyone. Creditors, her father's associates, men hired to drag her back to pay debts that weren't hers. She'd been foolish to use her real name. Foolish to think she could outrun her past. "You need to go," Cookie said quietly. "Now, take my horse. Ride to Thorne's cabin. He'll know what to do." "I can't keep running." "You can't face them either, not without knowing who they are, what they want." He was already moving, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. "Go. I'll send word when we know more." She wanted to argue, but the fear was already rising. Memories of her father's creditors, their threats, their plans for her. She took the supplies Cookie thrust at her, grabbed her small savings from the lockbox, and headed for the horses. Cookie's mare was steady and sure-footed, picking her way through the muddy trails with ease. Maeve had never been to Thorne's cabin, but Cookie's directions were clear. Follow the creek north. Turn at the lightning-struck pine. Look for the clearing with the 3 boulders. It took 2 hours of hard riding before she found it. The cabin was smaller than she'd expected, built solid against a hillside, with a clear view of the approach. Smoke rose from the chimney, and his horse stood in the lean-to beside the structure. She'd barely dismounted when the door opened, Thorne filling the frame with his rifle in hand. His expression shifted from wariness to surprise, to something harder when he saw her face. "What happened?" "Men in town, asking about me." The words tumbled out as he ushered her inside. "Tommy said they were from back east, buying drinks, asking questions." He guided her to a chair by the fire, poured coffee from the pot on the stove. "How many?" "2, well-dressed." She wrapped her hands around the mug, trying to stop their shaking. "Cookie said to come here, that you'd know what to do." "Cookie's got good sense." He moved to the window, scanning the approaches. "Did anyone follow you?" "I don't think so. I was careful." "Good." He turned back to her, and she was struck again by how different he looked here, in his own space, more relaxed, but also more dangerous somehow. "Tell me about Kansas, about what you're running from." She'd known this moment would come, but that didn't make it easier. "My father owed money, a lot of money, to the kind of men who don't accept bankruptcy as payment. Gambling. Among other things, he tried to stay ahead of it, borrowing from one to pay another, but eventually—" She stared into the coffee. "Eventually, he ran out of people to borrow from." "So he borrowed you." The words were flat, matter-of-fact, but she saw his knuckles whiten on his rifle stock. "He made a deal, said I'd marry one of them, a man named Gerald Hartley, said it would clear the debts, give me security." She laughed bitterly. "Security? Hartley was older than my father, with 2 wives already in the ground and a reputation for putting them there." "So you ran?" "The night before the wedding, took what little money I could find and ran." She met his eyes. "I'm not going back. I don't care what they threaten. I'll die before I go back to that." "Nobody's dying." His voice was calm, certain. "And nobody's dragging you anywhere you don't want to go. You don't know these men. I know their type." He set the rifle aside, pulled up a chair across from her. "Men who think money gives them the right to own people. Men who've never been told no and don't like hearing it now." They have legal papers. My father signed. Your father can't sign away what isn't his. There was an edge to his voice now. You're not cattle to be sold. Maeve, whatever papers they have aren't worth the match it would take to burn them.
The law might disagree.
Maybe back east, out here. Law's a bit more flexible. He leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. You'll stay here tonight, maybe tomorrow. I'll ride to town, see what these men want, what their game is. Then we decide how to handle it.
I can't ask you to.
You're not asking. I'm offering. He stood, moving to a cupboard. Been a while since I had to remind someone about Western hospitality. Might be fun. Despite everything, she felt her lips twitch. Your idea of fun is different than most. So I've been told. He pulled out blankets, began making up a pallet by the fire. You take the bed. There's a bar for the door and shutters for the windows. Nobody's getting in here without going through me first. Thorn. No arguments. You've had a hard ride and harder news. Rest. We'll deal with tomorrow when it comes. She wanted to protest, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. The cabin was warm, safe, and for now, that was enough. She moved to the narrow bed, paused at the edge. Why do you have such faith that this will work out? He was quiet for a long moment, banking the fire. When he spoke, his back was to her. Because I've seen what you're made of. Maeve Brennan, you survived Kansas, survived the trail, survived Cal Hensley. You worked hard, earned your place, never asked for anything you didn't earn. Men like that, they're used to dealing with people who break easy. You don't break easy. I feel pretty broken right now. He turned then, and in the firelight, she could see something fierce in his expression. Bent isn't broken, scared isn't surrendered. You're still here, still fighting. That's what matters. She lay down fully clothed, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. The bed smelled of pine smoke and leather, distinctly Thorn. Through half-closed eyes, she watched him settle by the fire, rifle across his knees, keeping watch. I'm not worth all this trouble, she said softly. That's where you're wrong. His voice was equally soft. You're worth exactly this much trouble. Maybe more. She wanted to ask what he meant, but sleep was already claiming her. For the first time since Tommy's warning, she felt the fear loosen its grip. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, she was safe in a cabin in the woods, protected by a man who asked for nothing but gave everything. Her last coherent thought before sleep took her was that she'd stopped running. Not because she couldn't run anymore, but because she'd finally found something worth standing still for. In the morning, they'd face whatever came. But tonight, with Thorn keeping watch and the fire crackling softly, she could rest. The woman who'd offered everything just to survive had found something she'd never expected. Someone who wanted her to do more than just survive. Someone who wanted her to live. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, an owl called, hunting in the darkness, and Maeve Brennan slept peacefully for the first time in months, no longer alone in her flight from the past. The morning brought clarity and determination. Thorn was already gone when Maeve woke, but fresh coffee steamed on the stove and a note lay on the table. Gone to town, stay put, bar the door. She spent the morning pacing the small cabin, trying to occupy herself with small tasks, tidying the already neat space, mending a tear in her skirt, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. It was near noon when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. Her heart hammered as she moved to the window, then sagged with relief when she saw Thorn leading the group, Cookie and several men from camp with him. It's handled, Thorn said as soon as he entered, but his expression was grim. For now. What do you mean, for now? Cookie answered, settling heavily into a chair. The men looking for you, they're still in town. Showed us papers, all legal-looking. Marriage contract signed by your father. Debt agreements, the whole mess. But here's the interesting part. Thorne added, pouring himself coffee. They're not just debt collectors. They're hired guns. Professionals. Someone paid good money to track you down.
Hartley,
Maeve whispered.
he never could stand being told no.
Well, he's about to learn that lesson harder. Thorne's smile was sharp. I had a conversation with them. Explained how things work out here. They weren't impressed.
What did you tell them?
The truth, that you're under the protection of the camp. That any business they have goes through me. And that their papers don't mean much in Montana territory.
And they accepted that.
Not exactly. Cookie shifted uncomfortably. They said they'd be back with the territorial marshal, make it all official-like. Said you had 3 days to come willing, or they'd come take you. The bottom dropped out of Maeve's stomach. The territorial marshal had real authority, could enforce Eastern judgments. If they convinced him the papers were valid.
So we have 3 days,
she said, proud when her voice didn't shake. No, Thorne corrected. We have 3 days to make sure there's nothing for them to take. She frowned.
I don't understand.
The contract is for Maeve Brennan to marry Gerald Hartley. Correct. To satisfy debts owed by your father.
Yes, but...
Hard to enforce a marriage contract on someone who's already married. The cabin went silent. Even Cookie looked surprised. Maeve stared at Thorne, certain she'd misheard.
What are you saying?
I'm saying there's a simple solution. He met her eyes steadily. Marry someone else. Today. Make their contract worthless.
Marry? Who?
But even as she asked, she knew. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, equal parts hope and fear.
Well now,
Cookie said, suddenly very interested in his coffee.
I recall there's a traveling preacher in town. Happens to be leaving tomorrow. Heading north.
Convenient timing.
This is insane,
Maeve said. You can't just... I won't let you sacrifice... Who's sacrificing? Thorne's voice was mild. Way I see it, it's a practical solution to a practical problem. Marriage out here isn't like back east. It's a partnership. A way for folks to build something together, protect each other.
You don't even know me.
Not really. I know enough. He leaned against the table, watching her. I know you work hard. Pay your debts. Stand by folks who help you. Know you've got courage enough to run from a bad situation and sense enough to build a better one. That's more than most marriages start with.
And what do you get out of it?
Maybe I get a partner who can keep books. Help me expand my business beyond just riding patrol. Maybe I get someone who makes a decent cup of coffee and doesn't talk my ear off when I'm trying to think. His expression softened slightly. Maybe I get to thumb my nose at some Eastern stuffed shirt who thinks he can buy people. That alone might be worth it. Cookie cleared his throat. I'll just step outside, check on the horses. He lumbered out, leaving them alone. Maeve sank into the vacated chair.
This is crazy.
Is it? Thorne moved closer, crouching so they were eye level. Listen, I'm not saying it has to be traditional. You'd have your own space at the cabin, or we could build you one separate if you prefer. The legal protection is what matters. The rest, we figure out as we go. And if Hartley doesn't accept it, if he pushes anyway, then he and I will have a more direct conversation. There was something dangerous in his smile. I've been nice so far. That can change. You do all this just to help me.
Maeve.
He reached out, stopped just short of touching her hand. You asked me once why I helped you that first night. Truth is, I saw something in you. Still do. You're not meant for men like Hartley, locked away like some prize. You're meant for... He gestured vaguely at the window. The mountains beyond. This freedom, choice, the right to make your own way. And marrying you gives me that. Marrying me keeps you from marrying him. What you do with that freedom is up to you. She studied his face, looking for the trap, the hidden cost. But there was only sincerity in those storm-gray eyes, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. All right,
she heard herself say. All right, but we do this proper. I won't have folks saying I trapped you or tricked you. Fair enough. He stood, offered his hand to shake on it. Partners. She took his hand, felt the calluses and warmth. Partners. Cookie reappeared as if by magic. So do I need to fetch that preacher? Fetch him, Thorne confirmed. And grab Mrs. Muller while you're at it. Maeve should have a woman there. Make it respectable. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Mrs. Muller arrived in a whirlwind of efficiency, producing Maeve's one good dress from somewhere, pinning her hair up proper. Always knew that man would do something unexpected, she muttered, jabbing pins with unnecessary force. But this takes the cake. You sure about this, girl? No, Maeve admitted. But I'm sure about not going back to Kansas. Well, that's something, I suppose. The ceremony took place at sunset in Cookie's tent, the preacher looking slightly bewildered but willing enough when his fee was paid. Half the camp crowded in to witness, rough men in their best shirts, hats in hand. Someone had found wildflowers somewhere, pressed them into Maeve's hands. Thorne had cleaned up, his hair tied back neat, wearing what looked like his only good shirt. When he took her hands for the vows, his were steady and warm. Do you, Thorne Ashford, take this woman? I do. No hesitation, no doubt. And do you, Maeve Brennan? I do. The words came easier than she'd expected. Then, by the authority vested in me, by the territory of Montana and the Lord above, I pronounce you man and wife. There was an awkward pause. The preacher cleared his throat. You may kiss your bride. Thorne leaned in, and for a moment Maeve thought he'd kiss her properly. Instead, his lips brushed her forehead, gentle as a blessing. We'll do this right, he murmured, low enough only she could hear. Whatever right means for us. The camp erupted in cheers. Someone produced a fiddle, another a jug of something that definitely wasn't water. Before she knew it, Maeve was swept into an impromptu celebration, rough hands shaking hers, gruff voices offering congratulations. Never thought I'd see the day, Cookie said, pressing a wrapped package into her hands. Wedding present. It's not much. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. Her name, her new name, tooled on the cover. Maeve Ashford, in neat letters. It's perfect, she said, blinking back tears. The party continued as darkness fell, but eventually Thorne appeared at her elbow. Ready to go home? Home. The word sat strange on her tongue, but she nodded. Let him help her onto his horse. She rode behind him through the darkness, arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him. The cabin looked different somehow, knowing it was hers now too. He helped her down, led her inside. I'll take the barn tonight, he said. Give you some privacy to settle in. Thorne. She caught his arm. Thank you for all of it. I know this isn't what you planned. Plans change. He smiled, that rare, real smile that transformed his face. Sometimes for the better. Get some rest. Mrs. Ashford. Tomorrow those men will come calling, and I want you ready to face them as who you are now, not who they think you should be. Mrs. Ashford. The name felt like armor, like freedom, like possibility all rolled into one. She watched from the doorway as he headed to the barn, then turned to survey her new home, their home. Strange as that sounded. Tomorrow would bring challenges, Hartley's men, legal battles, the reality of this sudden marriage. But tonight, she was Maeve Ashford, wife of Thorne Ashford, protected by law and by choice. The woman who'd been ready to sell everything just to survive had instead chosen something else entirely. She'd chosen to fight, and for the first time in her life, she wouldn't be fighting alone. 3 weeks had passed since the hasty wedding, and life had settled into an unexpected rhythm. True to his word, Thorne had given Maeve her space, taking the barn while she kept the cabin, but gradually, without either of them quite planning it.
things had begun to shift. It started with morning coffee. She'd make extra, and he'd appear at the door, accepting a cup with quiet thanks, then staying for breakfast because it seemed foolish to cook twice, then lingering to discuss plans for the day, improvements to the cabin, the small leatherworking business she'd proposed. People need more than just trapped furs, she'd argued. Bags, belts, gloves for the winter. We have the materials, the skills in camp. Why not use them? He'd listened, asked questions, and finally agreed. Now, a corner of the cabin served as her workshop, where she'd begun crafting simple goods with leather scraps from the camp. The men had been skeptical at first, but when she'd produced a pair of gloves that actually fit and lasted, orders had started trickling in. This particular evening found them working by lamplight, Maeve stitching a leather pouch while Thorne mended tack at the table. The silence between them had become comfortable, companionable even. "Storm coming," he said, glancing at the window. "Can smell it on the wind." She looked up from her work. "Bad one." "Could be. Spring storms can be unpredictable." He set aside the bridle he'd been working on. "Might be better if I stayed in the cabin tonight, just in case." Her needle paused. In 3 weeks. He'd never suggested staying inside. "Of course, that makes sense. I'll take the floor by the fire. Won't bother you none." "Thorne," she set down her work. "This is your home. You shouldn't have to sleep on floors and in barns." "Our home," he corrected gently. "And I told you, we do this at your pace. Whatever you're comfortable with." She studied him in the lamplight. 3 weeks of watching, learning. He was careful with her but not condescending, protective but not possessive. He asked her opinions and actually listened to the answers. When Hartley's men had returned with the territorial marshal, he'd stood beside her as she'd shown them her marriage certificate, had supported her as she'd faced down her past. The marshal had been unimpressed with their claims, especially when Thorne had produced witnesses to the wedding and papers showing Maeve as his legal wife. Hartley's men had left empty-handed, though not without threats of retribution that Thorne had met with stony silence. "What if," she said slowly, "we tried something different?" He went very still. "Different how?" "The cabin has 1 bed. Seems foolish for you to sleep on floors when there's room enough for 2. Her cheeks burned, but she pushed on. "Just sleeping. Nothing else. But maybe it's time we stopped pretending we're strangers." "We're not strangers," he agreed quietly. "Haven't been for a while now." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first spatters of rain hit the windows. He stood, banking the fire for the night while she tidied away their work. The domestic routine of it struck her. How natural it had become, moving around each other with practiced ease. When it came time to actually retire, awkwardness returned. She changed into her nightgown behind the screen while he saw to the door and shutters. When she emerged, he was standing by the bed looking uncertain. "I can still take the floor." "Thorne." She moved to one side of the bed, turned down the covers. "It's just sleeping." He nodded, blew out the lamp, and settled on top of the covers fully clothed. The bed dipped with his weight, and she was suddenly acutely aware of him, the warmth he radiated, the sound of his breathing, the careful distance he maintained. The storm broke in earnest, rain hammering the roof, wind howling through the trees. Lightning illuminated the cabin into brief, stark flashes. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said into the darkness. "When I was young, my mother would tell me stories to distract me." "What kind of stories?" "Fairy tales, mostly. Brave knights and rescued princesses." She laughed softly. "Seems silly now." "Nothing silly about it." His voice was thoughtful. "Everyone needs stories to get through the dark times." "What stories did you have?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "My grandmother was Lakota. She told different kinds of stories. About warriors and spirits, about finding your path when the world seemed dark." "What happened to her?" "Gone now.
Whole family's gone. No self-pity in it, just fact. Been on my own since I was 16. She turned toward him in the darkness. Could just make out his profile in the stormlight. I'm sorry. Long time ago. He shifted slightly. Point is, we all need something to hold on to when things get hard. Stories, faith, other people. Nothing weak about it. Is that why you help people? Because no one was there to help you? Maybe. She felt him shrug. Or maybe I just don't like bullies. They lay in silence, listening to the storm. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Maeve felt herself relaxing. There was something deeply comforting about not being alone while the world raged outside. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. That night at the Broken Wheel, were you really just passing through? Or were you there looking for someone to help? He chuckled. Cookie send you to ask that? No, I just wondered. Truth, I was there for a drink and a meal. Saw you come in, saw the situation developing. Could have ignored it. Probably should have. But something about the way you held yourself, even scared and desperate. You had dignity. Seemed wrong to let Cal take that from you. So you decided to marry me? There was teasing in it now. The fear that had driven their union fading into something else. That wasn't the plan, he admitted. The plan was to get you somewhere safe. Maybe help you find work, move on. But you kept surprising me. The way you worked at the camp, took care of me when I was shot up. Faced down those men with your chin up. Somewhere along the way, keeping you safe started mattering more than it should. And now? Now, he turned his head to look at her. Now I figure I'm the luckiest man in Montana. Got a wife who can work leather, keep books, make coffee that doesn't taste like mud, and stands up to hired guns without flinching. Man could do a lot worse. Is that all? Even in the darkness, she could see his smile. No, but the rest might scare you off, and I've gotten used to having you around. Her heart was beating too fast. I don't scare easy anymore. No, he agreed. You don't. The storm was passing, thunder fading into the distance. In the quiet that followed, she made a decision, moving carefully. She shifted closer, until she could rest her head on his shoulder. He tensed for a moment, then relaxed, his arm coming around her with careful gentleness. This okay? He asked. Yes. It was more than okay. It was right in a way she couldn't explain. Thorn. I'm glad you decided to help me that night. So am I. His fingers traced light patterns on her arm. Question now is, what do we do next? What do you mean? I mean, you're safe from Hartley. The marriage served its purpose. If you wanted to leave, make your own way now. I wouldn't stop you. Could even help set you up somewhere, if you wanted. She pushed up on one elbow to look at him. Is that what you want for me to leave? No. The word came quick and certain. No, that's not what I want. Then why bring it up? Because you should know you have choices, real choices, not just the lesser of evils. His hand came up to cup her cheek. If you stay, I want it to be because you want to, not because you have to. She leaned into his touch. I want to stay. Why? Because somewhere between that first night and now, this stopped being about survival and started being about living. She took a breath. Because you make me feel safe but not trapped. Because you see me as more than what I can give you or do for you. Because when I think about leaving, nothing out there seems as important as what's here. Maeve. Her name was rough on his lips. I need you to know. I didn't plan this. Didn't marry you expecting anything. But being around you these weeks... I know. She did know. Felt it in the careful way he moved around her. The protective stance he took whenever they went to town. The way his eyes found hers across the camp. Me too. He drew her back down, tucking her against his side. So we take it slow. Figure out what this is, what we want it to be. I'd like that.
They settled into comfortable silence. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the eaves. Inside, Maeve listened to Thorne's heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her ear. "No more barn for you," she said sleepily. "This is where you belong." "If you're sure." "I'm sure," she yawned. "Partners share things, including beds, even if it's just for sleeping." "Just for sleeping," he agreed, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "For now." "For now," she echoed, and found herself smiling too. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The leather business to build, the camp to help run, a marriage to figure out. But tonight, she was warm and safe in the arms of a man who'd offered her freedom and stayed to offer her more. The girl who'd been willing to trade everything just to survive had found something worth living for. And as sleep claimed her, Maeve Ashford knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Summer arrived in full force, turning the Montana landscape golden and dry. The leather goods business had grown beyond Maeve's wildest hopes. What started as a corner of the cabin was now a proper workshop, complete with a wooden sign that read "Maeve Ashford, Fine Leather Goods," hanging outside. She'd hired 2 men from the camp to help with the heavier work, and even young Tommy Hendricks spent his afternoons learning to tool patterns into belt leather. The orders came steady now, from townspeople, travelers passing through, even a commission from a cavalry unit stationed to the south. "You're building something real here, Mrs." Muller observed one afternoon, having ridden out to collect a set of saddlebags she'd ordered. "Never thought I'd see the day when folks would seek out the camp for anything but furs." Maeve wiped sweat from her brow, leather dye staining her fingers. "People need quality goods that last. We provide that." "That's not what I mean." "And you know it." The older woman's eyes were knowing. "You've changed this place, given these rough men something to be proud of besides how many pelts they can bring in. That's no small thing." It was true, Maeve realized. The camp had transformed over the months. Where once there had been only tents and rough shelters, now small cabins were going up. Men who'd planned to move on come spring had stayed, drawn by steady work and the sense of community growing around the leather shop. Even Cookie had mellowed, though he'd die before admitting it. Just yesterday, she'd caught him teaching one of the younger trappers to read, using her ledgers as practice material. "Speaking of change, Mrs." Muller continued, a sly smile playing at her lips. "When are you and that husband of yours going to stop pretending?" "Pretending? Girl, I've got eyes. The way that man looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, and you're no better. All this dancing around each other when it's plain as day you're both already gone on each other." Maeve felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was true that things between her and Thorne had shifted again. They shared the bed each night now, though still carefully clothed, still maintaining that last barrier. But the careful distance of their early days had given way to something else. Lingering touches, long looks, conversations that went deep into the night. Just this morning, she'd woken to find herself completely entwined with him, her head on his chest, his arms around her like she was something precious. They'd stayed that way longer than necessary, neither willing to break the spell. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Love always is, Mrs." Muller gathered her packages. "But complications aren't always bad. Sometimes they're just life getting interesting." After she left, Maeve tried to focus on work, but her mind kept wandering. Tomorrow was her birthday. Not that she'd told anyone. Back in Kansas, it had been just another day, but this year felt different. This year, she had things worth celebrating. The afternoon stretched hot and still. Most of the men were out on the trap lines or hunting, leaving the camp quieter than usual. Maeve was bent over a particularly intricate piece of tooling when she heard horses approaching fast. Too fast. She looked up to see Thorne riding hard into camp, another rider keeping pace. Her blood chilled when she recognized the second man,
one of Hartley's hired guns from months ago. But something was different. The man was swaying in his saddle, and as they drew closer, she could see blood soaking through his shirt. "Maeve," Thorne's voice carried across the space. "Need your help." She ran to meet them, catching the injured man as he half fell from his horse. Up close, she could see he'd been shot, the wound still seeping. "What happened?" "Found him on the North Road," Thorne said, helping her get the man inside. "Ambushed by claim jumpers, same ones that got me a few months back. He was trying to reach town, get help. But he's one of Hartley's—" "Not anymore." The wounded man's voice was weak but clear. "Haven't been for months. Hartley's dead." Maeve's hand stilled on the bandages she was preparing. "What?" "Hart gave out 2 months ago. His estate's been settled. The debts—" He winced as Thorne helped him onto the table. "The debts died with him. Came west to find honest work, get away from that life." "And you just happened to end up in Montana?" Thorne's voice was skeptical. "Heard there was good work here. Heard." The man's eyes found Maeve. "Heard you'd built something decent. Thought maybe a man could start over." They worked in silence, cleaning and bandaging the wound. It was bad, but not fatal if kept clean. When they finished, the man, who gave his name as James Morrison, was settled on a cot, weak but stable. "Why should we trust you?" Maeve asked quietly. "Don't have to." Morrison's laugh was bitter. "But I'll tell you this. Working for Hartley was the worst mistake I ever made. Saw what he did to women, how he treated people like property. When he died, I swore I'd never be part of something like that again." "Pretty words," Thorne said. "Doesn't mean much." "No, it doesn't." Morrison met his eyes steadily. "But I'm hoping actions might— Those claim jumpers, they're planning to hit the camp. Heard them talking before they shot me. Something about the leather shop having a safe full of money." Maeve exchanged glances with Thorne. They did have a safe now, holding the profits from the growing business. Not a fortune, but enough to tempt desperate men. "When?" "Tomorrow night. During the birthday celebration." Maeve started. "What birthday celebration?" Morrison looked confused. "The one the whole camp's been planning, Cookie's been baking for 2 days." She turned to stare at Thorne, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Might have mentioned to Cookie that tomorrow was a special day. How did you even know?" Mrs. Muller might have mentioned it, and I might have suggested the men would want to celebrate." He shrugged. "You've done a lot for this camp. Seemed right to mark the day." Despite everything, warmth bloomed in her chest. They'd planned a party. For her. "This is all very touching," Morrison interrupted weakly. "But there's still the matter of armed men planning to rob you tomorrow night." The warmth faded, replaced by cold practicality. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. They'll wait until the celebration's in full swing, when everyone's distracted. Then we'll be ready for them." Thorne said simply, "Maeve, can you stay with him? I need to talk to Cookie. Get the men prepared." She nodded, watching him stride out with purpose. Morrison was studying her with curious eyes. "You're different than I expected," he said. "How so?" "Hartley painted you as some helpless thing, needed saving from yourself." He smiled weakly. "But you're running a business, got the respect of men twice your size, married to one of the most dangerous men in the territory. Doesn't seem helpless to me." "I was never helpless," she said quietly. "Just desperate. There's a difference." "Yeah, there is." He closed his eyes. "For what it's worth. I'm glad you got away. Glad you built this. Maybe when I heal up, there might be work for a man trying to make amends." "Maybe," she allowed. "We'll see what tomorrow brings." Tomorrow, her birthday, a celebration she hadn't asked for but found herself wanting. And now, a fight to protect what they'd built. It seemed fitting somehow. Nothing in her new life came easy, but that made it worth more. As evening fell, the camp filled with returning trappers.
Thorn moved among them, quiet words preparing them for what was coming. But there was no panic, no fear. These men had faced worse than claim jumpers. They'd protect their own. Maeve found herself at the leather shop as sunset painted the sky crimson. Her sign hung straight and proud, her name clear for all to see. Inside, orders waited to be filled, leather ready to be worked, a real business, a real life. Admiring your handiwork, she turned to find Thorn behind her, close enough to touch, thinking about how much has changed. All for the better. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Morrison will be fine. And tomorrow we defend what's ours. Our first real test as partners. His hand lingered against her cheek. You scared? No. And she wasn't. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Together, he agreed. Then, softer. Maeve, there's something I've been wanting to... But Cookie's voice interrupted, calling them to dinner. The moment broken. They walked back to the main camp. Tomorrow would bring its own moments, its own chances. For now, there was work to be done, plans to be made, and a home to defend. The woman who'd once been willing to trade anything just to survive now had something worth fighting for. And fight she would, alongside the man who'd taken her hand and asked for nothing but her trust. Tomorrow would test that trust, but tonight, she knew it would hold. It had to. They'd built too much to lose it now. The first snow of winter came early, catching everyone by surprise. Maeve stood at the window of the leather shop, watching fat flakes drift down, remembering another snowy night when she'd had nothing but desperation and 3 coins sewn into her corset. Wool gathering. She turned to find Thorn in the doorway. Snowflakes caught in his dark hair. He'd been gone 3 days on patrol, the longest separation since summer. Without thinking, she crossed to him, brushing snow from his shoulders. You're back early. Couldn't miss today. He caught her hands, held them. How's Morrison? Getting stronger. It had been 2 months since the attempted robbery. 2 months since Morrison had proven himself by fighting alongside them despite his injuries. He finished that special order for the cavalry, has real talent with detail work. And you trust him now? I'm learning to... She studied Thorn's face, seeing new lines of tiredness. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. He pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers. Missed you. 3 days felt like 3 weeks. Her heart stuttered. These moments of raw honesty between them had become more frequent, the careful walls they'd maintained slowly crumbling. I missed you too. They stood that way for a long moment, sharing breath and warmth. Then Thorn pulled back, something determined in his expression. Come riding with me. Now it's snowing, and I have orders to... The orders can wait, please. Something in his voice made her nod. She bundled into her coat, one of her own making, rabbit fur-lined and warm, and followed him to where their horses waited. They rode in companionable silence through the falling snow, taking a trail she'd never followed before. The world was muffled, magical, transformed by winter's first kiss. Finally, Thorn stopped in a small clearing where an old pine stood sentinel. Why here? She asked as he helped her dismount. This is where I came that night, after I left you at the broken wheel. He touched the pine's rough bark. Sat here trying to convince myself to ride on. Leave town. Mind my own business. What changed your mind? You... He turned to face her. The way you looked at that key like it was salvation. The way you said thank you like you meant it. I'd seen too many women broken by men like Cal. Couldn't let it happen again. So you saved me. No. His voice was fierce. No. You saved yourself. Every day, every choice. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it. Thorn, I need to say this. He took her hands again, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. That night Morrison told us about Hartley being dead.
You said you were never helpless, just desperate. You were right, but Maeve, I was desperate too.
What do you mean?
I'd been alone so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about someone else's tomorrow, to want to build something instead of just survive it. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. Then you came along with your dignity and your determination, and suddenly I had reasons to stay in one place, reasons to plan beyond the next job, the next trail.
The snow fell harder, curtaining them from the world.
Maeve's throat felt tight. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. The words fell between them. Simple and true. Not because I saved you or you needed me. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you look at ledgers like they're poetry and turn scraps of leather into art. Because you fed me soup when I was shot and trusted me when I asked you to run.
Thorn.
I love you because you're my partner, my equal, my match in every way that matters. And I need to know, his voice cracked slightly, I need to know if this marriage is still just protection to you, or if it's become something more.
Maeve looked at this man who'd offered her freedom and stayed to offer his heart, remembered all the small moments, his hand steady on hers during the robbery attempt, the way he brought her coffee without being asked, how he listened when she talked about expanding the business, the way he held her at night like she was precious but never pushed for more than she offered. It stopped being about protection the night you offered to sleep in the barn, she said softly. When you said we'd do this at my pace, whatever I was comfortable with. And now I wake up reaching for you when you're gone. I watch for you from the shop window. I plan things just to see you smile. She freed one hand to touch his face, feeling stubble and cold skin. I love you too, not because you saved me, but because you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else saw something to use or own.
Maeve,
her name was a prayer on his lips.
I love you because you're gentle without being weak, strong without being cruel, because you gave me choices and honored everyone. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Because you took my hand and asked for my trust, nothing more.
He made a sound that might have been her name again, then kissed her. Not the careful forehead kisses of their early marriage, but something deep and real and claiming. She kissed him back with everything in her, months of careful distance finally collapsing, leaving only truth. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. Come home with me, not to sleep apart, not to pretend. Come home as my wife, real and true.
Yes.
No hesitation, no doubt.
Yes.
They rode back through the snow, closer than necessary, hands reaching across the space between horses. The camp was quiet, most everyone inside escaping the weather, but smoke rose from their cabin chimney. Cookie must have started a fire for them. Inside, everything looked the same but felt different. This was home, truly home, in a way nowhere had been since she'd lost her parents' farm. I have something for you, Thorne said, producing a wrapped package from his saddlebags. Meant to give it to you earlier, but then I got distracted by declarations of love. She unwrapped it carefully, gasped at what lay inside. A leather journal, tooled with incredible skill, wildflowers and mountains intertwining around her initials. M.A. Maeve Ashford. It's beautiful. Open it. The first page held his careful handwriting. For all the stories yet to be written, happy birthday. 6 months late, all my love. T. You remembered. Hard to forget the day my life got better. He pulled her close. Though, technically, your birthday's not the day I want to celebrate most anymore. No. March 15th. The day you said I do to a marriage neither of us understood yet. He kissed her temple. Best confused decision I ever made. She laughed, turning in his arms. We should celebrate that. Make it a camp tradition. The day Thorne Ashford did something impulsive and it actually worked out. The day Maeve Brennan chose to stay and changed everything, he countered.
The day we both chose,
she said, and kissed him again. Later, much later. They lay entwined in the bed they'd shared so carefully for months. The walls they'd maintained had fallen away, leaving something new and precious in their wake. No more sleeping apart. Thorn murmured against her hair. No more pretending this is just convenience. No more pretending, she agreed, tracing patterns on his chest. Though I think everyone knew before we did, Mrs. Muller's been smirking at me for months. Cookie's been worse. Yesterday he asked when he should start building a cradle. Maeve stilled. They hadn't talked about children, about that kind of future. What did you tell him? That we had time, that we're still figuring out how to be us. He tilted her chin up. Was that right? Yes. She kissed him softly. We have time for all of it. The business is growing, the camp's stable. We can take our time with the rest. I like the sound of that. Time. He pulled her closer. Never thought I'd have someone to plan beyond tomorrow with. Now you're stuck with me. Gladly, happily, forever, if you'll have me. I already said yes. Remember in Cookie's tent, with half the camp watching? That was different. That was necessity. His voice grew serious again. This is choice. This is love. This is real. Then yes, she said again. Yes to all of it. To forever. To whatever comes next. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the darkness held tight and planned for dawn. The woman who'd been willing to trade everything to survive had found something worth living for, and the man who'd offered his hand had given his heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, orders to fill, a business to run, a life to build together. But tonight, they were simply Thorn and Maeve, two souls who'd chosen each other despite the odds. And that choice, renewed with every breath, every touch, every whispered promise in the darkness, would carry them through whatever came next. Spring returned to Montana with all its promise, painting the valleys green and filling the streams with snowmelt. A full year had passed since Maeve first stumbled into Red Rock, desperate and alone. Now she stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Thorn's arms wrapped around her from behind. Penny for your thoughts. He murmured against her hair. Just thinking how different everything is. She leaned back into his warmth. Last spring, I was running. This spring you're home. Home. The word still sometimes caught her by surprise. But it was true. The cabin had grown. 2 rooms now instead of 1, with plans for more. The leather shop had its own building, with 3 full-time workers, including Morrison, who'd become invaluable. The camp itself had transformed into something closer to a small town, with permanent structures replacing tents and a sense of community that drew new settlers monthly. Mrs. Ashford. Tommy Hendricks came running up the path, no longer the boy who'd warned her about Hartley's men, but a young man growing into his strength. Cookie says to tell you the supply wagon's here, that special leather you ordered from Denver. I'll be right there. She turned in Thorn's arms. Want to come see it's for your new saddle? My saddle's fine. Your saddle's held together by stubbornness and prayer. She kissed him lightly. Let me make you something worthy of the man who patrols these mountains. His arms tightened around her. Long as you're here when I come home, I don't care what I'm riding. Smooth talker. But she kissed him again before pulling away. Come on. If we don't get there soon, Cookie will have unpacked everything himself and complained about his back for the next week. They walked hand in hand down to the main camp, greeting the men preparing for the day's work. It still amazed her sometimes. How natural this felt. How she'd gone from being an outsider struggling to survive to being the heart of this growing community. The supply wagon was indeed there, and with it, unexpected visitors. A woman stood beside the wagon, well-dressed but travel-worn, 2 children clutching her skirts. She looked lost, frightened in a way that sent Maeve back to her own first days here. "Can I help you?" Maeve approached carefully, noting how the woman's eyes darted between the rough men unloading supplies. I'm looking for work. Any kind of work." The woman's voice was educated. "Eastern. My husband died on the trail. We have nowhere else to go." Maeve's heart clenched. She glanced at Thorne, saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Collins. These are my children, Mary and James." "Well, Sarah Collins." Maeve smiled warmly. "It so happens we need someone to help with the books at the leather shop. The work's grown beyond what one person can manage. Can you read and write? Work with numbers?" Hope bloomed in the woman's face. "Yes, I kept accounts for my husband's business back in Philadelphia." "Then you're hired. We can't pay much to start, but there's a small cabin just finished that needs tenants. You and your children are welcome to it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Just like that, you don't know anything about me." "I know you're brave enough to keep going when everything seemed lost," Maeve said softly. "That's enough to start." As Cookie showed the family to their new home, Thorne squeezed Maeve's hand. "Seeing yourself in her? Seeing what could have been?" She watched the children's wonder at having a real roof over their heads again. "If you hadn't been there that night." "But I was." He turned her to face him. "And now you're here for her. That's how it works. We help each other, build something better together." The day unfolded with its usual rhythm. Maeve worked in the shop, training Sarah on their system, pleased to find the woman quick and capable. Thorne rode out on patrol but was back by sunset, as he always was now, unless absolutely necessary. That evening, they gathered with the others for dinner in the main camp. Cookie had outdone himself, and the long tables were full of laughter and conversation. Sarah and her children sat wide-eyed, taking in this strange new community that had welcomed them so readily. "Never thought I'd see the day," Cookie said, settling beside them with his own plate. "Women and children making a proper town of us rough trappers." "Change comes whether we want it or not," Thorne observed. "Better to guide it than fight it." Speaking of change, Morrison cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I've got news. Been writing to my sister back east. Told her about this place, about starting over. She wants to come out. Maybe open a small school for the children gathering here." "A school?" Maeve's eyes lit up. "Morrison, that's wonderful. Next month, if that's acceptable. I know it's another change." "It's exactly the kind of change we need." She looked around the table at the faces that had become family. "We're building something real here, something lasting." After dinner, as had become their tradition, Thorne and Maeve walked to the old pine tree where he'd first declared his love. The trail was familiar now, worn by their passages. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked as they stood beneath the ancient branches. "How much your life has changed since that night at the Broken Wheel." "Every change has been for the better." He pulled her close. "I was existing before, not living, going through the motions, one job to the next, no real purpose beyond the next sunrise. And now I have you. We have this place, these people. We have a future we're building together." He cupped her face in his hands. "I have everything I never knew I wanted." "When you took my hand that night," she said softly, "you asked for my trust. Just that, nothing more." "It seemed like enough at the time." "It was everything." She covered his hands with hers. "That trust became partnership. Partnership became friendship. Friendship became love. And love became a life worth living." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The railroad was coming closer, bringing change that would transform the frontier. There would be difficult decisions about growth, about preserving what they'd built while adapting to new realities. But tonight, They had this each other, a community of misfits and wanderers who'd found home in an unlikely place, a leather shop that bore her name, a life neither had dared dream of when desperation first brought them together.
I was going to offer everything just to survive,
Maeve said quietly.
my dignity, my choice, my future. I thought I had no options left.
But you did have options? You just couldn't see them yet.
No, I couldn't.
She turned to face him fully.
But you could. You saw a different path, offered a different choice.
You took my hand and asked for trust instead of surrender.
And you gave it.
He kissed her forehead, gentle as that first blessing. Brave enough to take a stranger's word, strong enough to build on it. We built on it, she corrected. Together. Together, he agreed, and kissed her properly under their tree as the first stars witnessed. They walked home through the peaceful evening, greeting neighbors, checking on Sarah and her children settling in, stopping to admire the new school building taking shape. Their cabin welcomed them with lamplight and warmth, truly home in every sense. As they prepared for bed, Maeve pulled out the leather journal Thorne had given her and began to write. 1 year ago, I thought my story was ending. I was wrong. It was just beginning. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as desperate chances, and the strongest love grows from the simplest acts of human kindness. I offered everything to survive. Instead, I received everything I needed to truly live. And it all started when a stranger took my hand and asked for nothing but trust. She closed the journal and set it aside, joining Thorne in their bed. Outside, the camp settled into quiet sleep. Inside, two people who'd saved each other held tight and dreamed of tomorrow. The woman who'd been willing to trade her first night just to survive had found something infinitely more precious. A love built on choice, respect, and the radical belief that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. And in the morning, they would wake and continue building their life together, one choice at a time, one day at a time. Forever grateful for that moment in a smoky saloon when a desperate offer met with an unexpected answer, and two lives changed forever. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to connect and hear your thoughts about Maeve and Thorne's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West.